Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. Want to welcome everyone into our weekly live show. We're going to go over some of the most interesting police cases and crime news from the last week. Hope everyone had a good Memorial Day weekend. And again, my name is Daniel. Please go ahead and follow us over at Cops and Cons TV. Make sure that you share the live stream with as many people as possible. Like and subscribe to the channel. Want to welcome some people in. Looks like we have Sergeant George from California. Sergeant George says this is the best form of debate. Absolutely, and that's one of the most important things about this is, thank you, Sergeant George, appreciate that. So one of the most important things about this is as I'm going through these stories, you might have a different opinion, and I'd like to hear that opinion so we can interact with our viewers. That's one of our favorite things to do. So definitely put in the comments anything in there that you might think is different or have a different opinion about some of these cases. Want to welcome in Officer Blue Gun. How's it going? And Shaquille Oatmeal. Dan, hi from Chicago. Hey, Dan, I'm also from Chicago, Southwest Side. Shaquille Oatmeal is from Dallas, Texas. All right, so we're going to get right into it. So the first case that we're going to talk about, so this happened last Saturday over in Red River, New Mexico. Now, a lot of people who aren't here from the Southwest may not know where Red River is, but Red River is near Taos. A lot of people have heard from Taos. It's essentially in northern New Mexico. It's beautiful out there. It looks more like Colorado than it does New Mexico. So what happened is in Red River, New Mexico, every single year for just about the last 40 years, right around Memorial Day, in order to honor veterans, there's a motorcycle rally that takes place in the town. This has been going on for about 40 years or so. Well, this year there were over 20,000 bikers at this motorcycle rally in Red River. I believe there were 28,000 bikers, and there was a tragedy that happened during this event. Essentially, there was a confrontation between rival motorcycle gangs, and as silly as this sounds, this started in Albuquerque, and the dispute between the rival motorcycle gangs started over a wedding photo. As silly as that sounds, but it bled over, and these individuals who had the dispute about the wedding photo, it spilled over when the two different parties, out of 28,000 motorcyclists who were there, they ran into each other in Red River at this giant motorcycle rally. The confrontation between two gangs, it ended up being a shooting. During the shooting, multiple people shot. There were 3 individuals who were killed, 5 who were injured. One individual has been charged with murder. However, he is claiming self-defense. So when this happened, you can imagine, so Red River is a small town, and pretty much when this happened, the entire town was shut down. So it's really going to be up in the air whether they are going to do this anymore, but it's absolutely crazy. Yeah, Shaquille O'Neal, wedding photo, craziness. Yeah, I mean, it had to do with a rival gang member posting a wedding photo with a different gang member in there, so they thought that he was with someone else. I mean, all this stuff sounds pretty childish, but apparently this is how adults act sometimes. So let's see if we have any comments or anything about that, but that was a pretty big story that happened. It actually made national news just because there were 28,000 bikers there, and there was this shooting that really hasn't happened there. It's been safe the last 40 years or so that this has happened. Let's see, Ghost Rider says, former deputy, love your channel. Thank you so much, Ghost Rider. We appreciate that. Yeah, so just wanted to start it off with the Memorial Day story that happened over in Red River, New Mexico. Again, it's absolutely beautiful out there, really close to Taos. It's about 2.5 hours or so from Albuquerque. Sergeant George says, just goes to show that staying away from biker gangs is the best course of action, especially when they hate on one another. Yeah, and this is one of those things. There were 28,000 of them there, and this rally has been going on for about 40 years. So my guess is this is a thing that may not happen further there. It was a nice event that got ruined by a couple of people who were violent. All right, the next story that I want to talk about also happened on Memorial Day. So this happened in Little Rock, Arkansas, and some stories have happy endings. This is one of those stories. So Little Rock, Arkansas, this individual's name is Markevious King. So Markevious King, it was essentially an attempt attempted robbery that went wrong for him. So what happened in this story is there was a mother, her boyfriend, and her 2 children who were in a parking garage in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they were loading a wagon onto the top of their car that they had just purchased. So the 2 small children, they got into the back seat of the vehicle. The mom got into the front passenger seat, and the boyfriend was finishing up putting the wagon on the car from behind like a coward without any kind of provocation whatsoever. Markevius King went up behind the boyfriend and started punching him in the head, almost knocked him out. What happened then is Markevius King then got into the driver's seat of the vehicle, and he started punching the mother in front of her 2 small children. It was at that point that, in reasonable fear of her own life and the lives of her kids and her boyfriend, she was able to pull out a gun, and she actually fired at Markevius King, and she shot him both in the neck and the chest. He fell down. He's in critical condition. Police were called. Now, a little bit about this. So when he recovers, because he is in critical condition, so he will face at least attempted robbery charges and aggravated battery charges. So about this, it's important to notice when something like this happens, you have to think, okay, was this the first time that Mr. King had been through something like this? Because a lot of comments that I saw on different news sites about this case, they said something to the effect of, well, maybe he'll learn his lesson. Maybe Markevius King will learn his lesson, because a reasonable person would think that being shot in the head would make you learn your lesson about this kind of behavior. But not for Markevius King. That's not how he rolls, because this isn't the first time that he was shot in the head while he was trying to rob someone. Back a while ago in 2002, now he was younger then. He was only 16 years old, but back in 2002, during an attempted robbery, he was actually shot in the head at that point. In that instance, he was only charged as a juvenile, so he didn't do a whole lot of time in jail. Because 2 years later, in 2004, he was actually involved in a shooting where he shot 2 people. One of the individuals died, and he was charged with murder. He was able to get off on that on a hung jury. Then a few years later, in 2011, he was actually charged with first-degree murder, but he was able to beat that charge as well. So hopefully this is the last time that Markevius King is able to terrorize anyone's. And again, this is the second time that he's been shot in the head. So hopefully this is all that it is going to take. And this is a feel-good story, because these are the kinds of situations where, when someone is victimizing people, especially when the victim is a sympathetic victim, a mother with kids who is just out on a weekend buying a wagon, something for their kids, and someone for no reason at all comes up and just attacks them and tries to do physical violence and steal their property for absolutely no reason at all. All right, let's see some of the comments here. Let's see. Officer Blue Gun, he loves a feel-good story. We all do. I am poster 7. He was a felon. Oh, well, yes, he was a felon. He had been charged 3 prior felonies, but again, he was able to beat all of the other charges, so he actually wasn't convicted, even though he had been implicated and actually charged with 3 other homicides. Sergeant George says, even though he survived, he should have known how unpredictable karma can be. Karma is like a snake. Shaquille Oatmeal also says that he is tired of these thugs. Yeah, I think a lot of us are. And, there's a lot going on in these cases when it comes to self-defense. It almost seems that, since the whole of the funding of the police and the soft on-crime attitude that's kind of infected this country, that there are a lot more people who are taking matters into their own hands. Not just this case, but the case I'm going to get to in a second, and also when it comes to that Daniel Penny case that I've talked about. Not going to talk about it again this week because there are no other updates, but it just seems like people are in situations where more and more often they are having to take matters into their own hands. 1, in order to keep their family, just the immediate safety of their family. And then 2, you never know if you call a police officer how long it's going to take, because police departments are having a really difficult time recruiting and retaining police officers. And there's so much crime these days that it could be a while before a police officer actually gets there. Ghost Rider says, never amazes me how much the bad guys get away with. Absolutely. No, it's absolutely crazy. So the next story that I'm going to talk about, it's almost in this same vein, only the individual who we should all be looking at as the victim was actually charged with a crime. And if we did a poll right now to say, hey, what state or city do you think this is going to be in, where someone who was the victim of a crime took matters into their own hands and then they were charged? If we had to do a poll right now, most people would guess New York, because that seems to be the pattern, what's going on there. And that's exactly what happened in Queens, New York. So this was actually just a couple days ago. What happened is that there was a 32-year-old individual named Cody Gonzalez. So Cody Gonzalez went to an apartment complex right around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he shattered the front door of the apartment complex. It was around that time that a 65-year-old resident named Charles Foner, he was actually coming in. He had just parked, and he was actually near the parking garage, and he was walking back to his apartment. It was at that point that the victim, Charles Foner, the 65-year-old who lives there, was confronted by 32-year-old Cody Gonzalez, who had just shattered the door. Now, there is surveillance video of this. However, it hasn't been released yet. So here's what some of not only the surveillance video, but here's what some witnesses said. So it said that initially because he was about 40 feet away, Mr. Gonzalez was about 40 feet away from Mr. Foner, and he was yelling and he was screaming at him, and he was armed with what witnesses said was a sharp object. So at this point, no one knew, was it because he had just shattered the glass? Was it a piece of glass? Was it a knife? It was unknown, but multiple witnesses said that it looked like it was some kind of a sharp object. So from about 40 feet away, after committing this crime of the vandalism, he started screaming at Mr. Foner. Well, Mr. Foner, again, he's 33 years older. So there's over a 30-year age gap between the offender and the victim. So Mr. Foner, he did have a firearm on him. What he did is he did pull out his firearm, and he basically gave a warning, and he gave essentially commands to Mr. Gonzalez to leave him alone, to not victimize him, to not approach him. So you would think that a reasonable person, even if you are in the mood to victimize someone, that maybe you're not going to victimize, approach, terrorize, threaten someone who has a firearm and has pulled it out. However, that's not what Mr. Gonzalez did. Mr. Gonzalez ran towards Mr. Foner, and essentially he closed the distance from 40 feet to 8 feet. When Mr. Gonzalez got within 8 feet of Mr. Foner, it's at that point that Mr. Foner opened fire. He fired at least 3 rounds, and he killed Mr. Gonzalez. Now, it turns out, because I know what everyone's going to want to know, the question that I would want to know is, well, what exactly was Mr. Gonzalez holding in his hand? Was it a knife? Was it a shard of glass? What was in his hand? So it actually ended up being a shiny pen. Obviously, Mr. Foner didn't know it at the time, but even if in his mind, not only him, but witnesses thought that it was a sharp object. But again, even despite the case, you have there's something called disparity of force, okay? So if an individual is 65 years old, and if you have someone 30 years younger who is about to attack you, you can use a higher level of force, and that may be reasonable under the law. That could be a reasonable self-defense claim if there is such an age gap. It could be the same if there's a size gap. Let's say there's I'm 5'10", somewhere between 180 to 190 pounds. The biggest person that I ever arrested was 6'8", 350 pounds. Luckily, he was nice and he was friendly. But if this 6'8", 350-pound guy wanted to fight with me, there's no way physically I would ever be able to handle him. I would have had to use some type of weapon system, hopefully just a taser. Again, luckily he was extremely nice. He went in custody just fine. But this is the type of person where you could say, yes, okay, he's unarmed, but he's so much bigger that the principle of disparity of force, yeah, that's something that is a reasonable thing when it comes to self-defense. So what happened with this case is that, and I said that Mr. Foner, he was charged. Well, he was. He wasn't charged with the physical act of the force that he used against Mr. Gonzalez. He wasn't charged anything with the shooting. So even though it ended up just being a pen, the totality of the circumstances of what happened, the district attorney did not charge Mr. Foner with the actual shooting or any kind of a battery or murder or attempted murder or anything like that. What he was charged with was essentially not having a permit for the concealed firearm, which is kind of silly. I think that we have to look at it this way. So he was being assaulted, attacked, in reasonable threat of his life from Mr. Gonzalez. Okay, that's a felony. That's a pretty serious crime to do to someone who's in any circumstance. Okay, that's a pretty serious crime. I think we all have to come to the realization that sometimes individuals, in order to protect themselves, may have to commit smaller crimes like the not having a permit for your concealed carry, that you might have to commit a smaller crime in order to protect yourself from being a victim of a violent crime. Like, that's not an unreasonable thing for me to say, for lawmakers to realize, and especially for local district attorneys to look at. So he has been charged so far with the weapons violation for not having a concealed carry permit. Now, a little bit more about Mr. Foner, which I think is important. So he's 65 years old. He's not a bad guy. He's not roaming the streets at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for trouble. 65 years old, he has zero criminal history. So that should say something about him, that he has zero criminal history. He also does have permits for a shotgun and for a rifle, but he did not have the permit to have a concealed carry weapon on him as he's walking around. In all fairness to the district attorney, when questioned about, hey, like, why are we even filing these charges against someone who's like a legitimate victim, who even you yourself, the DA, you are saying this was a legitimate self-defense shooting. Like, are you really going to be so chicken shit to go after him for this concealed carry permit nonsense? And even the DA, when questioned about it, said something to the effect of, well, this is a complicated case, and this case is going to go to a grand jury. So it's very possible that Mr. Foner won't be indicted on anything because it will go to a grand jury. So if I had to guess, that's what I think will happen. That's my prediction, is that this case will go to a grand jury. He will not be indicted. He will not, and no charges will go forward against him in this case. Because really, there's been all kinds of community support around Mr. Foner in this case. In this area in Queens, there have basically been people who have been protesting in his favor in order to try to get the charges dropped. So it seems like that's where public sentiment is. And, it's one of those things with public sentiment in New York City. We could just say from a legal standpoint that really public opinion, that really shouldn't affect what the law is. The law should be the law, and district attorneys, that's what they should apply. But we've seen in a couple different cases now in New York City that actually hasn't been the case. You remember the case that we covered last year in New York City. The individual, his name was Jose Alba. He worked at the bodega. Again, he was another man. I believe he was in his 60s while working at the bodega. A man who was 30 to 40 years younger, in his 20s or 30s, actually entered the store, was trying to rob him, went behind the counter at the bodega, and Mr. Alba was able to take out a knife, and he actually killed the individual who was attacking him and threatening him, and essentially restricting his movement, which could be false imprisonment or kidnapping. If you remember, Jose Alba, he was initially charged, but there was so much backlash that DA Alvin Bragg had dropped the charges. Almost the opposite is true for Daniel Penny. So Daniel Penny's case, after Daniel Penny killed Jordan Neely, after Jordan Neely threatened to kill all kinds of people on the subway, that it was public outcry. Now, maybe Daniel Penny would have been charged anyways, but the public outcry was for Daniel Penny to be charged. Charges were filed. So again, if I had to predict, my guess is that Mr. Foner in this case, that the charges will be dropped, or he won't be indicted by a grand jury. All right, let's see what some kind of comments are on this. Steve says, Steve Ladner, 2 types of people depend on the police for their safety: the ignorant and or the stupid. Steve, I'm going to ask you a question on that. So 2 types of people depend on the police for their safety: the ignorant or the stupid. So what if you're disabled? So what category is someone who has a disability, someone who has a heart condition, a 79-year-old woman? So how about a 13-year-old kid? So to say that there's only 2 types of people who depend on the police for safety, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, Steve. I'm going to be real honest with you. But yes, people should take their own personal safety seriously, and they should at least care about these things. And the idea that we should pretend that there aren't any threats out there, well, that doesn't make sense. So yes, you should do things in your own life that make yourself safe and be able to protect yourself. But, relying on police to to help you as well. That's not an unreasonable thing, and a lot of people have to do that. Ghostwriter says, a retired captain, we always deployed rubber rounds for situations like that. Absolutely. Sergeant George says, there should be signs near houses that say stay away from people who may or may not have a firearm on them. Absolutely. So I like signs like that. It's kind of the opposite of the gun-free zone signs where pretty much all mass shootings occur. Sergeant George says, no doubt that the bad guy was looking for his John Wick moment. Well, he got it, even if it didn't work out so well for him. Steve says, grand jury indictments don't mean anything in Bexar County if you have a badge. Okay. Grim Reaper says, isn't it how the evidence is presented that pushes a verdict one way or another? Grim Reaper, sure. Yeah, no. So what a district attorney is supposed to do is they're not supposed to just try to get as many prosecutions or convictions as they can. What district attorneys are supposed to do is to seek the truth. That's what they're supposed to do. Now, defense attorneys are not supposed to seek the truth. Defense attorneys are to vigorously defend whoever their client is to make sure that all of their constitutional rights are intact and afforded to them. But a district attorney is supposed to seek the truth. But district attorneys, DAs are elected officials, so public sentiment, yeah, that is going to play into it somewhat. There really isn't any way around that. However, if a district attorney looks at a case, looks at the evidence, and so the standard to arrest is probable cause. But in order to get a conviction, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If a district attorney doesn't think that they can get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, they should not be filing charges. So hopefully this is one of those cases. Let's see. Bill the Brave says, I've seen the police attack both the type of people you just described in horrific ways. I believe you. There's 800,000 police officers in the United States. Those police officers have somewhere around 55 million annual citizen contacts. The idea that you could find 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, or 100 bad incidents, that's not hard for anyone to do. So, if a police officer commits a crime, they should be investigated and they should be prosecuted if they commit a crime. No one is saying anything different. We want good police officers to protect all of us and our families. Now, when it comes to good police officers and Bill the Brave, I'm curious what you think about this next case. So this is a case where a police officer actually was charged with a crime, and this probably isn't going to surprise a whole lot of people, but if you just read the quick media hit stories on this case, you're not going to learn the most important element. So I'm going to get into the facts in a second, but it's reasonable for a person to just read a story, see the headline, read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of a story, and you're not going to see literally the most important part of this story. So this is a case that happened back in April 24th of 2020 in Austin, Texas. Now, Officer Blue Gun is surprised. Officer Blue Gun is surprised that the media might leave something out, a relevant piece of evidence of an officer-involved shooting. I know, they would they would never do that. So this happened in April 24th of 2020. And if you know anything about spring, summer of 2020, that is absolutely the 100% wrong time to get into an officer-involved shooting. Any officer-involved shooting with a black individual, those officers are almost always charged because there was so much outcry from George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Jacob Blake. Whether the outcry is justified or not, depending on the particular case, pretty much all of these cases were lumped together. This was one of those cases. So April 24th, 2020 in Austin, Texas, Officer Christopher Taylor was charged with murder and the death of Michael Ramos. So the reason why I'm talking about this now is because he was charged. However, there was just a mistrial. A mistrial just happened in the case against the police officer. Now, the reason for the mistrial was the broad terms of it, to explain it, is essentially that the DA, the judge, the court, they were not able to seat a jury. There was a weird stuff going on in this court when it comes to jury tampering, and as far as I know, at least as of a couple hours ago, they haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet, so not really sure exactly what was going on. But there were some things where the jurors had trouble traveling to and from the courthouse. There were other incidents where things were mailed to potential jurors, like envelopes of white powder. So because they were not able to seat a jury, a mistrial was declared. However, the DA has already said they are going to go forward and prosecute Officer Taylor again. So here's what happened. So there was a call for service over an apartment complex, and essentially the initial call was for drug dealing, and you can listen to the 911 call. So this isn't just me making things up. This is all public. So there was a 911 call where a woman called and said that there's a couple of individuals inside of a gold Prius. So when it comes to drug dealing, a Prius isn't what I normally think of, but that's what happened here. So the caller said that inside of a gold Prius that there were two individuals, a man and a woman, and she said that they were smoking crack and cooking meth. She then said that she seen a gun in the vehicle. She then said that the male was holding a gun to the female. The dispatcher asked for clarification, which is what a dispatcher should do, because you know what? A lot of the times it's not illegal to be in possession of a gun inside of your car. Where I'm going with this is if the dispatcher doesn't get good information, this could really take a call to something. Then the police officer who sent isn't going to have good information either. So the dispatcher did a good job of asking questions. Okay, well, was there a gun in the car? Was the man pointing it at the woman? Was the woman pointing it at the man? Or did you just happen to see a gun in the car? Multiple times the caller said that the man was holding the gun to a woman. The dispatcher asked the question, was he pointing it at her? And the caller said yes. So now this goes from a call of just people doing drugs in a Prius, which it's not that no one cares, but honestly, that's a pretty low priority call, especially in a place as busy as Austin, Texas. A couple people doing drugs in the car, depending on how busy it is, again, that's not going to be a high priority call. Now, you say, there's a man and a woman in a car, they're doing drugs, but he's pointing a gun at the woman. That's a serious case. That is get there immediately, because that's not a drug call. That is a potential aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. That's someone who's possibly being kidnapped. That's false imprisonment. That is one of the very few serious felonies that even far left police departments that are into all the defund the police nonsense, even police departments that have that kind of a city council still are going to take this seriously. A man holding a woman, maybe against her will, at gunpoint. I don't know how many people, with their will have guns pointed at them. So that's the information that the police officers had. So police officers arrive on scene. What they did first is they did something good. Actually, the police officers met up about half a block or so away and they congregated. And this is a thing that police officers should do, because what you don't want is, let's say, 5 or 6 or 10 police officers all arriving. You're coming from different directions. No one knows, okay, who's going to give commands? Which police officer is going to have a beanbag shotgun? Who's going to have a taser? Who's going to be lethal? Who's going to have a rifle? So that planning in advance is extremely important to the best police officers can do to make sure that things go safely. And cops did that in this case. So they met, a block or so away. They came up with a plan. Who was going to give commands? Who was going to have less lethal munitions? Exactly which weapon systems they were going to have. Again, this is called a force array. This is what good, trained, reasonable, and prudent police officers do. They did that in this case. So they did that. Then they went over to the apartment complex and they found the vehicle. They found the gold Prius. As soon as they did, they initially started a felony stop. Now, the way that this vehicle was parked, it's not ideal. I've said before that felony stops or that felony stops, or some people call it high-risk traffic stops, that a lot of these things, they never go as planned. So the way this was, the Prius was actually backed in. So as police officers approached, they were essentially head-on with the vehicle, which is not a good position for a police officer to be in. Ideally, you would conduct this like a traffic stop, so from behind the vehicle if possible. However, they were essentially head-on with this car, with this guy. So they did that. The police officers jump out with their weapon systems. Some have lethal force, some have less lethal munitions, including a beanbag shotgun, and they essentially gave one officer, not 10 officers screaming different things, but one officer gave very clear commands to the individuals in the car, starting with the driver, because that's typically how police officers do it. So they started giving verbal commands to the driver. Mr. Ramos was in the driver's seat of the vehicle. We know that he heard and understood what the police officers were saying because he exited the vehicle. He got out. Police officers gave him commands to, walk around. He left the door of the car open to walk around the door and walk towards them. He did that. So he complied. He was yelling like, what am I doing? Like, why are you doing this? What's going on? Now you have to understand at this point, especially when there's a possible felony in progress, police officers not only do they not have the obligation, they don't have the time. It's not reasonable to say, okay, hey, this is what's going on, and give like a rundown of exactly what happened. Time is of the essence. You have someone who's armed with a gun probably committing a violent felony. So yeah, you don't have time for that. So all police officers could do is give clear and concise commands and directions, try to get everybody into custody safely. That way this avoids the use of force, which is absolutely 100% the goal. So what happened is Mr. Ramos did exit the vehicle. He did walk to the front of the vehicle. So again, he was verbally kind of saying things that he didn't want to comply, but he did comply at least at first. Then he got to the front of the car, and police officers do what they do. They asked him to lift his shirt, so they were able to see his belt line. This is what police officers do on felony stops, but there was a report that he was armed with a gun. This is a reasonable thing for a police officer to do. It's at that point that he does lift his shirt. And at least from what you can see on the half of his body from when he lifts his shirt, you don't see any gun, but you don't know if there's a gun behind him or not. So at that point, police give him command to, face away from them and walk towards police officers. He does the exact opposite. He kind of slowly creeps back towards the front door of the car. They're giving him commands to walk towards police officers, keep his hands in the air, to not enter the car. Very clear commands. However, he doesn't listen. Just as he's about to get inside of the car, it looks like he's just about to sit down. A police officer does fire a less lethal beanbag shotgun round at him, which was reasonable to do. So he was hit with a beanbag shotgun round. At that point, that does not gain his compliance, and he gets back into the car. So now police officers think, okay, we have this individual. He's armed with a gun. He's already pointed it at the female, and now he's going to try to leave with her. This is literally an armed kidnapping in progress. Besides murder and sexual assault, this is like armed kidnapping is literally like the third most important violent crime that police officers are going to take seriously. It's pretty much homicide, sexual assault, kidnapping. And this is an armed kidnapping, unbelievably, extremely serious and violent crime. So police officers, even though he's in the car, they're still giving him all of these commands. However, he starts to drive away. As he drives away, Officer Christopher Taylor does fire 3 rounds at the driver's side of the vehicle. It does hit Mr. Ramos. He was shot and killed. He did die from his injuries. So there was all kinds of outcry about this. So not initially. So initially there wasn't an outcry. And Officer Taylor, it looked like he wasn't going to be charged with the crime. The reason is because he was able to articulate, okay, we had a credible report that he was pointing a gun at someone. He didn't follow our commands. We knew he heard the commands because he exited the vehicle, and we knew he didn't hear the commands. And now this person he was just pointing a gun at looks like they're a kidnapping victim. He's trying to leave with them. We as police officers, we can't allow that. That's something that can't be allowed. That is a violent fleeing felon. Someone we are able to articulate, not just the general danger, not just, hey, this guy's an asshole. We think he might do something in the future because he's just been a jerk his whole life. No, they are able to articulate the specific threat to the victim in the passenger seat. So it kind of looked like Officer Taylor wasn't going to be charged. Then all of the other stuff in 2020 happened. There was Breonna Taylor, there was Jacob Blake, and most importantly, there was the George Floyd case. So now those cases literally should have nothing to do with this case, but of course when it comes to public opinion and idiot DAs, it absolutely did have that. It absolutely did have that because Officer Taylor was charged. Now, how I started this case off with was where I said is, if you just read a couple headlines that, you're not going to get the whole story. So the most important part of this story, essentially the most relevant thing, the reason why shots were fired wasn't because of the drugs, the meth, the reports of smoking crack. Nothing to do with that. The literal reason why shots were fired from Officer Taylor was because there were reports that a gun was pointed at a victim. That's why. It's the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. It's the kidnapping. That is the reason. However, if you just pull up any of the stories about this case, it will not say that part. It completely leaves that out. What the stories say, it says that police officers were dispatched to a call reference drug dealing in a parking lot. The driver, Mr. Ramos, did not comply with commands. He tried to leave the scene, and he was killed by police officers. Now, listen, if that's what you think happened, and that's in your mind, if that's what you think happened, is it reasonable? Could a reasonable person, not like one of these crazy, police abolitionists or this ACAB crowd. I mean, the people who, honestly, these people that no one takes seriously because they're just so ridiculous and out there. So I'm not talking about that, but could a reasonable, prudent person say, okay, cops were sent to a call about drug dealing. The guy didn't comply. He tried to leave and cops shot him. Could you see a reasonable person saying, yeah, that's messed up. Cops shouldn't have done that. This officer should be charged. Absolutely. That is not an unreasonable position. But when you add in all of the other stuff, to me, this seems like it's at least it's in the category, in the discussion of it being a reasonable officer-involved shooting, given the actual facts of the case. So you have to think, why are they leaving that out? They're not doing it because they don't know. There's no way that me sitting here, not local in Austin, Texas, there's no way that I know more than them, but I'm reporting it and they're not. That is the part that is absolute nonsense. So I have a feeling, I know it's Austin, Texas, I get it. They're crazy out there. But once all the facts are heard, if the case is refiled, which the DA said that it would be, my guess is that the officer will not be convicted. At least I hope that he will not be convicted. Otherwise, what you're saying is, okay, police officers come on scene. There's credible information that someone is holding hostage at gunpoint one of your family members, and police officers literally can't do anything. They have to just let the offender drive away with you in the car. If that's what you want police officers to do, I'm good with it. But you can't have it both ways. You can't have it say, well, we want police officers to protect people. We want police officers in Uvalde to go in guns blazing and protect kids. But then on the other side to say, oh, we don't want an officer to protect that woman in the car. That's not what we want. No, we want the offender to be able to drive away with her and kill her, and officers will pick up the body later. You can't have it both ways. Listen, there is still a place for the warrior culture in policing, because no one calls a social worker to kill a monster. All right, let's see what kind of comments we have on this. Let's see. Bill the Brave says, okay, all kinds about Jesus Christ. Not sure where we're going with that, to be completely honest. Sergeant George says, moments like this is exactly what will happen when citizens don't hold themselves accountable for the things they do, and they decide to do an outcry for police accountability. Yes. Officer Blue Gun says, this is a great example of why a police officer would stand by and not protect the public. Officer Blue Gun, thank you so much for saying that. That is exactly right. So I think it's important that when we have individual communities really should shape the way that the police act. Now, we have the Constitution, okay? All police officers 100% should act within the bounds of the Constitution. That is the most important thing. But under that, as a community, do you want police officers to go after street racers? Do you want them to focus on drunk drivers? Do you want them to focus on illegal hard drugs? So it's reasonable for communities to say, within the bounds of the Constitution, do you want them to go after shoplifting rings? It's reasonable as long as it's legal and it's against the law, kind of having police officers, police departments, really fit what the community wants. I think that is really important. And the problem with this is, so you see this happen with this police officer in Austin. If you were a police officer in Austin, Texas, and you see someone who is being held hostage at gunpoint, what is the percentage that you would take action and use deadly force in a situation where we could all look and say, yes, of course this is a deadly force situation? Or are you going to say, you know what? I have a family at home. I have a pension. I have a job. I don't want to spend the next 35 years in jail for killing this person, even though I think I'm doing my job and my kids are going to grow up without a dad. Is that what you want police, or a mom? Is that what you want police officers to think when they're involved in situations like this? Okay. That's the thing. That's my answer. So whatever your answer is, if that's what you want them to think about and that's how you want them to act, I'm good with it. But if it's your son, your daughter, your wife who's being held hostage at gunpoint, then you also don't want police officers to act then, because they might kill a criminal, and that would just be a tragedy for everyone, wouldn't be? Let's see, any other questions on this? Yeah, Sergeant George agrees with Officer Blue Gun. Absolutely. Okay, let's see. Ghost Rider says, meth was the biggest problem for my department. Sometimes the meth offenders would get arrested twice in a day. Yeah, officer. Yes, Ghost Rider, meth is absolutely a crazy thing. Now, the last case. Now we have some sad stories today. The case in Red River was tragic because we had 8 people shot, three died. Officer Christopher Taylor, I do not think should be charged with a crime. However, we did have a couple good stories today, and I'm going to end this last story on a good note. This is a good story. This is the best feel-good story of the week. So this happened in Fresno, California, very recently. There was a dollar store employee, whose name is Jessie Soto. Now, she's been working at the Dollar General in Fresno, California for a while. She's also a college student. She's majoring in criminal justice. She's a college student, and she's the manager at this Dollar General store. Well, like all stores in California, shoplifting has essentially been out of control, and it's extremely irritating. It's extremely frustrating, and shoplifting has just been completely out of control. So what happened was an individual did enter the store, and he stole a bunch of items. He stole chips. He stole chips. He stole donuts. He stole flowers. He stole all kinds of things. And it was at that point that she told him to stop. And when she told him to stop, he called her a bitch. He called her a bitch when she said to stop. And he basically wouldn't listen. He then left the area on his bicycle. He left on his bicycle, and she basically said, "You know what? This is too much. This aggression will not stand." So what she did is as he left the scene on his bicycle, she followed in the car. As she followed in the car, it was one of those things where she pretty much paralleled him as he was driving away, and she paralleled him in her car, and she basically pulled her car right in front of his bicycle. He crashed into the bicycle. The stuff went everywhere. He wasn't seriously injured, but it was just an unbelievable, great video. Now, the problem with this is that she was actually fired from Dollar General because it is against their policy to go ahead and do that. They're not able to interact or certainly not chase people out of the store in their cars. So what ended up happening is that the police were called. However, he ended up getting away. It hasn't been identified. Now, because this is a violation of policy, probably, it's civilly, it's going to be really difficult for Dollar General. So my guess is that this offender, even though we don't know who he is he is looking at probably a six-figure settlement from Dollar General. And so my guess is that there is an attorney who's going to find him way before the police actually do to charge him with any kind of a shoplifting crime. So that was great. Or a Dollar General gift card. So I'll get a whole bunch of those. So she was fired. Her name is Jessie Soto. She has a GoFundMe. So if you look up GoFundMe Jessie Soto, Fresno, California, Dollar General, you'll be able to find it. She was fired. She's saying that she doesn't have a place to live, can't pay her rent. So that would be a good GoFundMe to donate to. Let's see. Sergeant George says, "How hungry is that bicyclist?" Well, some of the donuts were salvaged, which is an absolutely good thing. All right, so that's gonna be our show for today. Just want to thank everybody for coming in today. Really appreciate the questions and the interaction. Again, my name is Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News, and make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe to our channel. We will see you all next week, and everyone be safe.